What would you do if your own bank treated you like a fraud? When Alina Brooks tried to withdraw her money, she was humiliated and denied service. But when her son walked in, everything changed. What happens when the person you disrespect owns the bank? Stay tuned as we unravel a story of power, justice, and consequences. This is H2 Black Thread. Hit like and subscribe for more stories that demand justice. Alina Brooks believed in routine. Routine brought order. Routine meant control, predictability, and a certain peace of mind. That's why, on the first Monday of every month, like clockwork, she made her way to Jefferson State Bank. For over 25 years, she had walked through the same glass doors, greeted by the same warm smiles, and exchanged pleasantries with tellers who knew her by name. This bank wasn't just where she kept her money, it was part of her life. But today was different. The moment Alina stepped inside, she sensed it. The air had changed. The usual hum of friendly chatter between tellers and customers was missing. No one called out her name. Instead, there were quick glances in her direction, nervous, hesitant, almost wary. She adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder and pressed forward, refusing to let the odd atmosphere rattle her. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe. Or maybe something else was going on. Alina reached the counter, smiling at the young teller behind the glass. She had seen this girl before, Angela, if she remembered correctly. A sweet girl, always cheerful, though today her face was tight with unease. "Good morning, sweetheart," Alina said warmly as she pulled out her checkbook. "I'd like to withdraw $4,500. Angela hesitated, just for a second, but long enough for Alina to notice. She took the check and ID Alina slid across the counter but didn't immediately process the request. Instead, her eyes flickered toward the far end of the bank, toward the glass-walled office where the new branch manager sat. Alina followed her gaze. A woman, mid-40s, sharply dressed in an expensive gray blazer, sat with perfect posture behind a sleek wooden desk. Her brown hair was pulled back into an almost painfully tight bun, and in her hands she held a clipboard, fingers tapping rhythmically against it. Alina had seen this woman before but had never spoken to her. Lisa Caldwell, the new branch manager. She had taken over just a few weeks ago. Alina wasn't one to make judgments too quickly, but something about her didn't sit right. She was always watching, evaluating, and exuding an air of quiet authority, not the warm kind, but the kind that made people straighten their backs and choose their words carefully. Angela cleared her throat and stood up from her chair. "One moment, Miss Brooks," she said, before turning and hurrying toward Lisa's office. Alina frowned. This was new. Angela leaned down to whisper something in Lisa's ear, and just like that, the woman's head snapped up, eyes locked onto Alina from across the room. That look. Alina knew it. She had seen it before. It was the look of someone sizing her up, not as a person, not as a customer, but as a problem to be handled. Lisa set the clipboard down, pushed her chair back, and strode toward the counter with a confidence that reeked of self-importance. Alina held her ground. Lisa stopped just short of the counter, placing her manicured hands on the smooth surface between them. She didn't introduce herself, didn't offer a smile, just tilted her head slightly and asked, in the most clipped, dismissive tone Alina had ever heard, "And who are you?" For a second, Alina just stared. She blinked, convinced she must have misheard. Surely this woman wasn't asking her who she was, not in a place she had been coming to for longer than this woman had probably worked in banking. "I beg your pardon," Alina said, keeping her voice level. Lisa arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow, her expression neutral, yet somehow smug. "I don't recognize you," she said, glancing down at the check and ID still sitting on the counter. "And large cash withdrawals require extra verification. Bank policy." Bank policy my foot. Alina had never needed anything more than her ID before. She knew what this was. She had heard that tone before. That tone that wasn't about policy but about power, about making someone feel small, about making someone prove they belonged in a place that was already theirs. Keeping her voice steady, Alina met Lisa's gaze and said, "I've been banking here for 25 years. Lisa gave a tight little smile. "That may be," she said, "but policies change. You understand." Oh, Alina understood all right. She understood that Lisa had already made up her mind about her. That this wasn't about money. This was about who she thought deserved easy access to it. Heat crept into Alina's chest, but she pushed it down. Losing her temper wouldn't help. She had taught elementary school children for over 30 years. She knew how to deal with people who thought belittling others made them important. "Stay calm. Stay firm. Don't back down." "You can check my account history," Alina said, keeping her voice polite but pointed. Lisa sighed dramatically, as if this was an inconvenience. She tapped her polished fingernails against the counter, then glanced around as if making sure people were watching. "I still need to verify the funds," she said smoothly. "You understand. We've had incidents." Incidents. Alina knew exactly what she meant by that. She had lived long enough to know how certain words disguised ugly truths. She had never bounced a check. Never caused a single problem in this bank. She had earned the right to be treated with respect. Her fingers hovered over her purse. There was only one person she trusted to handle situations like this. She hated the feeling, the weight in her chest, the sting of being reduced to someone suspicious in a place that should have been safe. Lisa was still standing firm, that smirk lingering as if daring Alina to just walk away. But she wouldn't, not today. Alina reached for her phone and dialed her son's number. One ring. Two. Then, "Hey, Ma. You okay?" The relief that flooded her was immediate, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm at the bank. Can you come down here?" A pause. Then, sharp focused, "I'm on my way." She hung up, sliding her phone back into her purse. Lisa let out a short, amused breath. "Calling for backup?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Alina finally let a small, knowing smile touch her lips. Something like that. Lisa didn't know it yet, but backup was about to walk through that door, and when he did, everything would change. Alina Brooks had never felt unwelcome in Jefferson State Bank, until today. Even as she stood at the counter, ID and checkbook laid neatly before her, it was as if she wasn't supposed to be there. Lisa Caldwell hadn't outright said, "You don't belong," but she didn't have to. It was in her tone. It was in the calculated smirk, the dismissive posture, the way she barely even glanced at Alina's perfectly valid identification before deciding that, today, bank policy required more. Alina had spent 72 years on this earth. She had fought battles far tougher than this one. She had stood her ground in classrooms full of restless children. She had faced down school administrators who thought they knew better than a woman who had dedicated her life to education. And she had navigated a world that had, time and time again, tried to make her feel small. And she had refused. But this was different, because this wasn't just about her. It was about every other customer like her who had walked into this bank, fully entitled to their own money, only to be treated like a problem instead of a person. Lisa might have thought this would be easy, just another day, another customer who would eventually give up, sigh, and walk away. But she had miscalculated, because Alina Brooks was not the type to walk away. Alina inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She wouldn't raise her voice, wouldn't give Lisa the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Instead, she slowly reached for her purse. Lisa raised an eyebrow as Alina pulled out her phone, her expression flickering between mild amusement and annoyance. "You can call whoever you want," Lisa said, crossing her arms, but the bank's policies won't change. Alina didn't even look at her as she dialed. One ring. Two. And then his voice, calm, deep, steady. "Hey, Ma, you okay?" Just hearing him made the weight in her chest lessen, even though she kept her tone controlled. "I'm at the bank. Can you come down here?" A pause. A beat of silence followed by a shift in his voice, sharp, focused. "I'm on my way." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her purse. Lisa let out a short, condescending chuckle. "Calling for backup," she mused, tilting her head slightly, as if this was nothing more than an amusing inconvenience. Alina finally looked her in the eye and gave her a small, knowing smile. Something like that. 15 minutes passed. Lisa had gone back to her office, though not without throwing the occasional glance in Alina's direction, as if waiting to see her cave. Alina didn't move. She stood tall, hands resting on the counter, eyes steady. The tellers, some nervous, some sympathetic, cast occasional glances her way, but none dared intervene. The customers, some were watching intently, others pretending not to, their curiosity evident in the way they lingered. And then it happened. The glass doors swung open and he walked in. Derek Brooks. 6 feet tall, tailored charcoal gray suit, crisp white shirt, Italian leather shoes. Everything about him exuded power, precision, control. He wasn't just dressed well, he was put together. He carried himself with the kind of effortless authority that didn't require raised voices or grand gestures. The room didn't just notice him, it shifted around him. The low murmur of the bank faded. Tellers straightened in their chairs. Customers turned their heads. Even the security guard, who had been idly watching the exchange from a distance, adjusted his stance. The reaction wasn't out of fear, it was out of recognition. Because Derek Brooks was no ordinary man, and as soon as the bank employees realized who had just entered, a hushed whisper spread like wildfire through the room. "That's Derek Brooks. The Derek Brooks. Isn't he? He owns." Lisa, who had been lingering near the back, overheard the whispers, but it took her a second too long to piece it together. By the time she turned to face the man now walking toward the counter, it was already too late. Lisa stepped forward, smoothing her blazer as if that would somehow regain control of the situation. She hadn't realized the storm she had just summoned. Alina watched as her son surveyed the room with a calculated glance, taking in everything, noting every detail. His eyes flicked to the tellers, the waiting customers, the security guard at the door. Then, finally, to his mother standing at the counter. And the moment his gaze landed on her, his entire demeanor changed. His jaw tightened. His expression hardened. He had seen that look before, the one on his mother's face. He had seen it when she came home from a store, frustrated because a clerk had ignored her for 15 minutes while helping other customers first. He had seen it when a waitress had spoken to her like she didn't belong in the upscale restaurant he had taken her to. And now, here in her own bank, he was seeing it again. Derek exhaled slowly, controlling the flicker of heat in his chest before he turned his gaze to Lisa. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone even, smooth, but laced with something sharp underneath. Lisa hesitated, just for a moment. She had been so sure of herself just minutes ago. But now, with Derek Brooks standing in front of her, looking at her like she was a problem that needed solving, she suddenly wasn't so confident. Still, she tried. She squared her shoulders, mustering up that same haughty tone she had used on Alina. "This is a private matter," she said coolly. "I don't see how it concerns you." Alina watched as Derek smiled, a slow, dangerous kind of smile. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned to his mother, took in her expression, and then back to Lisa. "Oh, I think it concerns me," Lisa blinked. "And why is that?" Derek's voice was almost amused now. "Because this is my bank." Silence. Complete, utter silence. Lisa's smug confidence wavered visibly. Alina saw it happen in real time, the flicker of doubt, the realization creeping into Lisa's expression. And then, before Lisa could even form a response, one of the tellers, a young man with a nervous but knowing look on his face, leaned forward and muttered the words that sealed Lisa's fate. "Ma'am." "That's Derek Brooks, one of the largest investors in Jefferson State Bank." Lisa's face went white. Alina almost felt bad for her. Almost. Lisa had no idea what she had just done, and now she was about to find out. The air inside Jefferson State Bank had shifted. What had started as a routine withdrawal had now become something else entirely. A moment ago, Lisa Caldwell had been the one in control. She had been the one with the smug smile, the one with the final say, the one who got to decide who belonged and who didn't. But now, Lisa was standing face to face with the one man in this entire building she should have never crossed, and she was starting to realize it. Derek Brooks approached the counter with measured steps, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the tile floor. He wasn't angry, at least, not visibly. But there was a weight to him, a controlled intensity in the way he moved, the way his presence commanded the room without effort. Alina stood beside him, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the counter. Lisa, however, suddenly wasn't so sure of herself anymore. Derek's voice was calm, too calm as he looked at Lisa and asked, "Is there a problem with my mother's account?" Lisa hesitated, a slight flicker of uncertainty in her otherwise confident demeanor. She had spent the past 20 minutes acting untouchable, treating Alina like an inconvenience. But now, the weight of every watching eye in the bank made her suddenly aware that she wasn't untouchable at all. Still, she tried to hold her ground. She squared her shoulders, clearing her throat, and forced a cool, professional tone. "We're simply following security procedures for large cash withdrawals," Lisa said, a rehearsed response, her voice carefully controlled. Derek let the words hang in the air for a second. Then he slowly turned his head, his eyes landing on a middle-aged white man standing near the opposite counter. The man was tucking a thick envelope of cash into his jacket pocket, clearly just having completed a withdrawal of his own. He hadn't been questioned. He hadn't been stopped. He hadn't been asked for extra verification. Derek looked back at Lisa, his gaze steady. "Interesting," he mused. "I just saw that man withdraw money without any issues. Does this policy only apply to my mother?" Silence. Lisa's expression tightened. She opened her mouth, probably searching for a quick excuse, a way to spin this into something reasonable. But before she could say a word, one of the tellers, a young man who had been nervously watching this entire exchange unfold, leaned in slightly and whispered, "Ma'am, that's Derek Brooks, one of the bank's largest investors." And just like that, Lisa Caldwell understood exactly how badly she had messed up. Alina saw it happen. She saw the exact second the realization crashed over Lisa like a tidal wave, the slight widening of her eyes, the stiffening of her posture, the way her fingers twitched just slightly, as if she had the urge to adjust her blazer but didn't want to show weakness. A second ago, Lisa had been so confident. She had crossed her arms, given Alina a smug little smirk, and told her that the bank's policies wouldn't change, no matter who she called. She had been so sure of her authority. But now she was staring into the face of a man who had the power to decide whether she still had a job tomorrow. The entire bank felt it. The tellers behind the counter, the customers waiting in line, the security guard by the door, the shift in power. Derek didn't say anything at first. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, waiting, letting her sit with the weight of her own mistake. Lisa swallowed hard, but she couldn't afford to completely lose her composure, not yet. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She forced a smile. "Mr. Brooks," she said, adopting a new tone, one she should have used from the beginning. "I wasn't aware," Derek cut her off. "You weren't aware of what exactly?" Lisa blinked. I didn't realize." Derek tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he had already figured out. "You didn't realize who I was," he finished for her. "Or you didn't realize you were treating my mother differently from other customers." Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. There was no right answer to that question, because no matter which way she spun it, she had already lost. Eleanor stayed silent, watching the scene unfold beside her. She had spent her whole life watching people like Lisa get away with things like this, with discretionary policies that somehow always seemed to work against the same kind of people. She had seen women like Lisa brush off accountability with a well-rehearsed smile and a flimsy excuse. But today, she wasn't the one who had to fight this battle. Her son was. And from the look in Derek's eyes, Lisa wasn't going to win. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Lisa was scrambling for something, anything, to regain control of the situation. The tellers behind her were frozen in place. The customers were pretending not to watch but failing miserably. Even the security guard had stopped his casual stance and was now standing rigid, sensing that something significant was happening here. Lisa exhaled, straightened her back, and made one last attempt. "Mr. Brooks," she said, forcing a polite smile, "I assure you this was simply a misunderstanding. We have to be cautious about large cash withdrawals. It's purely about security." Derek chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Security," he repeated, as if testing the word out. Then, slowly, he glanced toward the white man across the room again, the one who had withdrawn his money without a problem. His voice dropped just slightly, just enough that everyone could still hear it. "Tell me, Lisa, when did security only apply to people like my mother?" Lisa's face drained of color. She was out of ways to talk herself out of this. And now Derek Brooks was just getting started. For the first time since this entire exchange began, Lisa Caldwell looked afraid. Not in a way that suggested she felt remorse, but in a way that suggested she finally understood the weight of her mistake. And Derek Brooks had no intention of letting her off the hook. The bank had fallen completely silent. No one was moving. No one was speaking. Everyone was waiting, watching. Because whether they admitted it or not, they knew they were witnessing something important. Lisa, still trying to salvage her authority, cleared her throat. She squared her shoulders, forcing her voice to remain even. "Mr. Brooks," she said carefully, "this was simply a matter of security protocols, I assure you." Derek didn't blink. "This bank operates on trust," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "and you just shattered it." The way he said it, low, controlled, firm, sent a chill through the room. Lisa froze, her mouth slightly open as if she had something else to say but couldn't get the words out. Because deep down she knew. She knew she had lost control. She knew no amount of professional jargon could dig her out of the hole she had just put herself in. But she still tried. "I was just following standard procedures," she insisted, her voice sharper now, more desperate. "If there was a misunderstanding, I can explain." And that's when another voice cut through the room. "No need to explain, Lisa." The voice was deep, steady, the kind of voice that belonged to a man used to making big decisions and standing by them. Slowly, every head in the room turned toward the source. A man in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward from where he had been standing near the offices. His gray suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly straight, and his expression was unreadable, except for the sharpness in his eyes. Samuel Warren, the regional director, a man who didn't usually show up at individual branches unless something serious was happening. Lisa's face went from pale to ghostly white in a matter of seconds. Her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but no sound came out. Samuel came to a stop beside Derek, his gaze pinning Lisa in place like a spotlight. Then, in a voice that left no room for negotiation, he said, "Effective immediately, you are no longer the branch manager of this bank." For a moment, Lisa didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Because this wasn't how this was supposed to go. This was supposed to end with her in control. This was supposed to end with Alina Brooks walking away, frustrated, defeated, feeling small. Instead, it was her career, her reputation, her power slipping right through her fingers. Lisa took one shaky step forward, raising a hand slightly as if she could somehow physically stop the words from hanging in the air. "Wait," she breathed out, "I can fix this." Samuel didn't blink, didn't move, didn't soften. "The only thing getting fixed," he said, "is this bank without you in it." That was it. That was the moment it hit her. The realization sank in like a heavy stone in water. Lisa had built her authority on intimidation and bias. She had made a career out of bending policies to her personal discretion, out of deciding who got to be treated with dignity and who didn't. She had thrived on the quiet kind of power that lets people like her get away with things like this every single day. But now it was gone, and no one, not a single person in that bank, was stepping forward to defend her. She turned almost instinctively toward her employees, the tellers, the assistant managers, the security guard, even the customers. No one met her eyes, not because they were afraid, but because none of them wanted to be on the side of the woman who had just been publicly stripped of everything she thought made her powerful. Lisa swallowed hard, then forced herself to stand up straighter. Even now, she was clinging to whatever dignity she could salvage. But it wasn't real, because no amount of good posture could change the fact that she had just lost everything. With one last look at Derek and then at Alina, she turned on her heel and walked out. The heavy glass doors of the bank swung open. The heels of her expensive pumps clicked against the marble floor. And then she was gone. The second Lisa disappeared through the doors, the entire bank seemed to exhale. There was a shift in the air, like someone had finally cracked open a window in a suffocating room. Some of the tellers exchanged glances. A few of the customers murmured quietly to each other. Even the security guard relaxed his stance slightly, because this was more than just Lisa losing her job. This was a message that things were going to change, that someone had finally been held accountable, that this wasn't just going to be swept under the rug like so many other moments like it. Derek exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back as if shaking off the tension of the past half hour. Then he turned back to his mother. Alina, still standing tall, looked up at him with something that wasn't just pride, but something deeper, something like vindication. And Derek knew, without her having to say it, that this moment wasn't just for her. It was for every other time in her life when she had been dismissed, ignored, belittled, or denied something she had every right to. And today, for once in her life, justice had actually been served. The echoes of Lisa Caldwell's departure still lingered in the air. The heavy glass doors of Jefferson State Bank had barely swung shut behind her, but the weight of what had just happened remained thick in the atmosphere. It wasn't just about one woman losing her job. It was about a system shifting right before everyone's eyes. And Derek Brooks wasn't done yet. Derek turned away from the entrance, rolling his shoulders slightly, adjusting the cuffs of his impeccably tailored suit. Then, with a deliberate step, he moved back toward the counter. Every pair of eyes in the room followed him. The tellers behind the glass, the customers still standing in line, even the security guard, who had been a silent observer this entire time, straightened as if bracing for something even bigger. And then, in a clear, firm voice, Derek spoke. "This bank exists because of customers like my mother." The room held its breath. "I will not tolerate discrimination disguised as policy." A ripple of understanding passed through the employees. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others stole glances at one another, as if weighing their next move in a workplace that had just undergone a seismic shift. The truth was, many of them had seen things like this happen before. Many of them had likely been complicit in looking the other way. But now the rules had changed. Derek scanned the room, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Starting today," he continued, "every denied transaction from the past 6 months will be reviewed. And if I find even one more case of policy enforcement that looks like what just happened to my mother, there will be consequences." The tellers stiffened. They knew what he meant. They knew this wasn't just a speech, this was a promise. Because Derek Brooks wasn't just another customer, he was a man who could and would follow through. And suddenly, the unspoken rules that had governed this place for far too long had been rewritten in real time. Eleanor had been silent this whole time. She wasn't one to gloat, wasn't one to rub salt in an open wound. But she stood there, her head held high, watching as one of the tellers, Rebecca, the young woman who had nervously witnessed everything unfold, stepped forward. Her hands, once shaky, were now steady as she spoke. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice careful, "I can process your withdrawal now." Eleanor looked at Derek, then back at Rebecca, and for the first time since stepping into this bank, she allowed herself a real smile. "I'd appreciate that." Rebecca nodded quickly, hands moving with precision as she counted out the $4,500 Eleanor had originally come for. No hesitation, no excuses, no questioning whether or not she deserved access to her own money. And just like that, the smallest but most significant victory of the day had been won, not just for her, but for everyone else who had ever stood in this exact same spot and been told no for reasons they weren't supposed to question. As Eleanor carefully tucked the bills into her purse, she took a slow breath. This wasn't just about the money. This was about respect, about not being made to feel like an outsider in a place where she belonged. About walking into a room and knowing that no one had the right to make her feel small. And today, for the first time in far too long, she felt it. Eleanor turned toward her son, her expression soft, but full of something deeper than just gratitude, something stronger than just pride. She placed a hand lightly on his arm and said, "You didn't just fire a woman, you changed an entire system." Derek smirked, glancing down at her, that familiar glint of confidence in his eyes. "That's the point." As they turned toward the exit, stepping through the same heavy glass doors that had once felt like a barrier, something was different. Not just the atmosphere inside the bank. Not just the way the employees exchanged glances, as if realizing the weight of the shift that had just occurred, but in the way the customers whispered amongst themselves, their gazes lingering on the place where Lisa Caldwell had once stood. Because, whether she realized it or not, Lisa Caldwell would never be remembered as the woman who enforced policy. She would be remembered as the woman who thought she was untouchable, until she wasn't. And the next time someone like her thought about treating another customer the way she had treated Eleanor Brooks today, they'd remember what happened here. They'd remember how quickly power can shift. As Derek and Eleanor stepped into the Georgia sunlight, the warmth of the day settling over them, he turned to her and asked, "You okay?" Eleanor exhaled, nodding slowly. "I am now." They didn't need to say much more, because some things don't need words, they just need action. Back inside, the employees of Jefferson State Bank knew things would be different now. Policies would be reviewed, customers would be treated differently, and those who thought they could use power to discriminate would learn the hard way respect is free. But for those who refuse to give it, there's always a price to pay.